Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first of 3 free webinars offered by The Ohio State University Sheep Team. Our Sheep Team is composed of multiple parts of the university, including Extension and the Department of Animal Sciences. Our speakers tonight are going to focus on lambing and kidding practices and troubleshooting issues that might arise this time of year. Our first presenter of the night is Jackie Smith, and Jackie will be talking about dystocia and dealing with that throughout your lambing and kidding processes. We'll also have presentations from Brady Campbell, who is our OSU Sheep Team Coordinator, and we'll finish with a presentation from Tim Barnes. And I'm your host for this evening, Christine Gelly. I serve on the OSU Sheep Team and work for OSU Extension in Noble County. To familiarize yourself with the Zoom webinar room, all of the attendees that have joined us are muted and your cameras are off, so we cannot see you or hear you. But we can still interact with you utilizing both the chat box and using the question and answer features. If you slide your mouse down towards the bottom of your screen, your control panel will show up. And that is where you will find the chat features and the question answer box. We will also be utilizing some polls this evening, and we will encourage you to use the chat throughout the program. If you have any problems during the program, feel free to send me a direct message in the chat and I will help you however we can. We will also allow time for question and answer at the end of the webinar. If your question does not get addressed during the talk, hang on towards the end and we will wrap up with those questions. At this point, we're going to start with our first poll before we start Jackie's presentation. So Jackie, if you'd like to go ahead and get your screen share going, we'll launch this first poll. The poll is going to ask you, are you a sheep or goat producer? That poll should be coming your way. And panelists, you should be able to vote as well. We'll just leave some time here for the votes to come in. Once we get to about 70% participation, we'll end the poll. Wow, we have 92% participation. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here, and you should see the results. We have primarily sheep producers here in the audience, but a good representation of goat producers as well, some of both, and some that are just here to increase their knowledge. This is excellent. I'll share those results with you. And then we'll stop. We'll also proceed into another. Poll number 2 is, have you attended an in-person program with us before? Whether that was in Noble County with me or somewhere in Columbus or Marion or Delaware County with Jackie or Tim. Wow, we're seeing a lot of people have not attended an in-person program with us before. We are happy that you're here with us tonight, and we encourage you to come back and visit with us in person when that is allowable and encouraged again. One more poll here before we get our presentation started. I'm going to go ahead and ask you, do you receive the OSU Sheep Team newsletter from the webpage? If you do, click yes. If no, we encourage you to visit sheep.osu.edu to sign up for that newsletter. You will get a notification every Wednesday of new content posted on the Sheep Team webpage. Okay, and with that, let's go ahead and start Jackie's presentation. I'm going to share these results with you. Most people here, Brady, are not subscribed to the webpage yet. We would love to see you over on the webpage. Brady does an excellent job of compiling content to share there, and you don't want to miss it. At this time, Jackie, the screen should be all yours. I'm going to go ahead and mute, and we'll allow you to take over.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Like she said, I'm Jackie Smith. I work in the Delaware County office as the 4-H and Ag and Natural Resources educator. I've been there for a little over 5.5 years, but I've been in the sheep barn my entire life. So I was born into that situation, and I can definitely say I think I started around 10 years old is when I had to start pulling lambs, because I, of course, was the smallest one. I had the smallest hands, and I was able to get in there and maneuver sheep around. So a good solid 20 years of experience is kind of where this is coming from, along with lots of other scientific-based information as well. So the lambing process, right? So I talked to all of us, and we got to say, there's lambs in that ewe, there's lambs in that uterus, and they have to come out one way or another. If they're in there, they've got to come out. So for the health of the lambs and the ewe, we want to be sure we're getting them out while they're still alive. If not, then we have a decaying process that starts, and it's not very pleasant for anyone involved. Just as much as possible, recognize those signs of labor as much as we can. So to increase our success, we want to recognize the stages of labor, understand what a normal birth position is, recognize what other abnormal birth positions are or malpresentations and birthing complications, correct those birthing complications, and deliver a healthy lamb. It's as easy as that, right? So when we talk about stages of labor, our first stage that we're actually going to physically see signs of is that cervical mucus seal. It's release, that cervix starts to expand. Then we have a water bag that comes out and becomes visible. The lamb then moves into that birth canal. Contractions lead to lamb delivery position. So the contractions actually move that lamb around inside of that ewe so that they can get into whichever delivery position. Hopefully it's normal position. Then we have lamb delivery. Then we have the afterbirth comes out, the placental and fetal membranes. So how do I know if this ewe needs help? This is a recent picture taken, I don't know, a little over 3 weeks ago. This ewe, she's been at it for 2 hours. She's been trying, she's been pushing, but really not hard, right? She hasn't really been really trying hard. She's been kind of acting funny or acting off, but really hasn't been actually pushing for 2 hours. So the rule of thumb is after 30 minutes is when you need to start helping that ewe out. 30 minutes of no visible sign of progress. So keep watching as best as you can. Once that water bag is visible and the ewe is not pushing, then we have to start thinking about, okay, is there something actually more that's going on here? What is happening? Is that presentation not normal? Could that lamb not get out because it's not presented properly? Is there an absence of contractions or pushing? Is this a ringworm situation? These situations should be examined as soon as possible. So possible potential situations that you could get yourself in is a deformity, right? So I don't know if any of you out there have pulled or felt what a deformed animal feels like, but it is definitely not normal. It's very hard to get your bearings straight when you're in that kind of a situation. Another potential situation is what we call ringworm, where that cervix is not dilated. It's very disheartening when you're in this situation. You can't even get to the lamb to feel what position the lamb would be in. So some others potential situations that you could have are malpresentations. So I pulled out the 7 most common: breech, head back, legs back, twin legs, locked elbows, upside down. There's a whole list of others. You can literally think of how many different ways a lamb could be inside that ewe. But these 7 up here are actually the most common that we can talk about. So how do I know what to do? What do I do? You diagnose the problem and then solve. So if we get into a situation that's a ringworm situation, you're not going to be able to feel the lamb. So you're not even going to be able to get in past that cervix. She's not very dilated at all. You may be able to get 3 or 4 fingers like you see here on the screen. You might be able to get in, but we don't want to push in. We don't want to forcefully push in because that could cause uterine tearing. So the solution is try and use 2 or 3 fingers and stretch it out kind of like a duck without tearing any fetal membranes and without tearing any uterine tissue, and keep stretching it out. Over 20 or 30 minutes, you might be able to get it opened or wide enough that a lamb or a kid could fit through. You can see here in the picture, it kind of looks like a duck, and you just kind of want to keep expanding as much as possible and massaging around. It gets very, very fatiguing for the human involved, the person with the hand who's doing this. It gets very fatiguing because that ewe is constantly contracting, having contractions, trying to push the lamb out, or not having them because she's in a ringworm situation. But that cervix is so tight that it gets very fatiguing on your hands. Another solution is to have a wonderful, great relationship with your veterinarian and perform a C-section so you can get those lambs out. What do you do if you have a malpresentation? So once you've figured out that the lamb or kid is not presented normally, you'll have to recognize what malpresentation is through feeling, correct it, and then deliver the lamb. So a normal birth, to understand what a malpresentation is, we have to know what a normal birth is. So a normal birth would be 2 feet coming out along with the head. The head should be in the center of the 2 legs. The limbs should be pointed directionally downward. I'll keep using this feet directionally downward. That means towards the ewe's hooves. So the ewe could be on her side. So when I say downward, I don't always mean towards the ground. I mean towards her toes or towards the ewe's feet and hooves. A normal birth presentation, you should definitely feel the nose of the animal, of the head, and you should be able to feel and see the front legs. So a breech birth has definitely multiple different visible appearances. It could be just the tail, it could be just the legs, it could be nothing. You could just feel kind of that rump of the animal. The solution is to either push that lamb back in and then retrieve those rear legs, especially if you don't have the rear legs to begin with. Once you have both rear legs and the tail, you've got all 3 of them, you can pull. We want to be sure that we're doing this as a fast one because we could definitely start breathing in some fluids. Head back. Personally, through my years of experience, this is the worst one. This is the worst one that I've ever dealt with. I've dealt with breech lambs, I've dealt with ringworms, but in the end, we just get C-sections on those ourselves on our farm. So this one is really, really hard because every time I always get that, I get the legs, I get them ready, and I get that head brought around, and so it's just where I want it, and bam, that ewe contracts and that head slips back, and I have to go in and do it all again. So if you can feel the legs, you want to be sure you come up on the shoulders. So it's kind of like an inching game. You kind of inch your way along up, and you can actually kind of get to the shoulder. You can hopefully get up that neck and bring that head around. Like I said, very easy said than done. This whole time the ewe is probably squalling, maybe flopping around. If it's a goat, it's definitely squalling. If you go in, you want to be sure you bring that head around. Once you have that head and 2 legs, then you can pull the lamb back out. If you have a head only, you kind of want to shove that lamb back in, pop those legs out, and bring it. Once again, just follow those shoulders down and pop those legs up as much as possible. Twin legs, so these are twin legs, they get tangled up in there, so it's actually really pretty common. We want to be sure that when multiples present, we have the right legs with the right heads. So we want to push that second lamb back in and pull the first lamb out, then go back in and get the second lamb. Locked elbows. This is, you kind of see a little bit of the front feet and some nose, but you don't have those full legs extended out. So you'll actually have to pull a little bit onto those front legs, pop them up over her pelvic bone or pelvic arch so that they come out forward, and you're not trying to get the legs and the head to come all out all at once. Upside down. This is presenting with nothing, basically. We want to be sure that we go in there, kind of flip that animal around, get it so that the top of the lamb's head is touching the ewe's tailbone and vertebrae on her backbone. So never pull that lamb upside down. You want to be sure you're pushing it in and that the feet are pointing downward. Pull and twist that lamb out so that it can be right side up when it comes out. So in summary, we want to be sure we recognizes those stage of labor, what a normal birth position is, recognize abnormal birth positions, birthing complications. We want to correct those, and then we want to deliver a live lamb, lambs from a live ewe, live lambs from a live ewe. We want to be sure we've got everybody alive at the end of the day. It's not easy. It's not as easy said than done. We want to be sure that you have a really good working relationship with your veterinarian. We also want to be sure that you guys know that before you use any drugs, hormone therapy, medicines, anything like that, be sure you're working with your veterinarian. There are situations where, exogenous hormones are going to be helpful, but there's also situations where it's going to be very detrimental. So be sure you're working with your vet on that. I know lots of large animal vets around this central Ohio area are more than willing to call and work through those problems with you on a phone. So they can kind of help you, walk you through those steps of pulling a lamb, having information on what kinds of drugs you could be using and whatnot. So we want to be sure you have that information readily and available to you. So a couple other reminders is we want to be sure that you guys are sleeving up. Be sure that you're trying to keep that area of that ewe as pristine as possible and as disease or infection free. Lubricant, when I say just push that lamb in and turn it around, lubricant is going to help you the most in those types of situations. We want to be sure that it's very slippery in there so that when we are trying to turn everything around, it's much easier to actually get that out and then down. This is a big one for me. I get the lamb about halfway out, a little bit past the shoulders, maybe into that midsection of the rib cage, and then I start pulling downward, down towards the ewe's toes. It kind of helps just the whole arching situation of her back and the pelvis and how that lamb will come out naturally. That's really helpful and beneficial. If we pull straight back the whole time, it doesn't work with the natural curvature of her body. We want to be sure we're using a clean sleeve. If we need to, we should re-sleeve up. If we've got the first lamb out and we're taking care of it over here on the barn floor, well, I definitely accidentally touched some straw. So we want to be sure we're getting a clean sleeve if we're going to go back in and look for that second one or get that second one back out. These things should help us prevent infection, but we also want to keep an eye on those ewes, especially the ones that had a really hard pull or we were digging and flipping and really in there a long way. Keep a really good eye on those ewes the next 2 or 3 days. If they, start to go off feed or start to think that, she's just not acting quite right, contact your vet. See if you can get some preventative medicine or some treatment for those infections if you think there is one. The other big thing is a front leg versus a back leg. I say the back legs have pointy elbows. And back legs bend forward. So as long as you know where the head of the lamb is, you should be able to figure out what type of legs you have. So these are just a couple of my references. Like I said, it is based on science and experience. Brady, I believe we are ready for the video.
Hi, I'm Jackie Smith, the 4-H and Ag and Natural Resources educator in Delaware County, and today we're going to be talking about small ruminant dystocia, so lambs and goats and how they could encounter some trouble during that birthing process. We have had multiple different types of birthing issues, and we're going to go through some of those in our simulators. So today with us we have some simulators of an actual ewe, which is this rubber plastic tote that we have, and then we have a birthing canal or birthing system in there. We have some little animal replicas that are baby lambs. They've got a fairly solid face and some hard structures in their legs to feel like bones, and a wonderful little tail that has been sewn on that does feel like there's little vertebrae in there. So hopefully when we practice we can actually tell what each of those parts are. So the first one that we're going to talk about is ringworm, which is when the cervix does not dilate all the way. So we want to be sure that we catch this one early. Ringworm would present as a water bag hanging out with maybe not even any pushing or straining from the ewe. Once that water bag is out for more than 30 minutes, we need to be taking some action if there's no progression of the lambs coming out or kids. Ringworm To describe how it feels, you would try to sleeve her or try to reach the animal. You would actually feel a blockage. It would almost be like you could not pass through. It'd be very tight. And you might be able to get 1 or 2 fingers in, but maybe not all the way through. Definitely an animal not coming out. So we're going to show you a little bit about a ring womb situation in our simulators. Remember that we are definitely want to be using sleeves as much as possible, OB sleeves or breeder sleeves we can use, and lubricant. Use as much lubricant as possible to get up in there and try to work that around, especially when we're in the scenarios that you're having to push back in, or when you're in that ring womb scenario where you're trying to open that cervix up. So like I said, ring womb would present with just a water bag hanging out and no actual pushing of the ewe. As you can see in here, we have a replica of what her cervix would be. You can probably see that my fingers can barely get through this cervix. It's so tight. There's no way a lamb's gonna come through here. So like we said, the solution would be to, over time, stretch this out and get your fingers in there, kind of like a duck, and keep stretching and stretching and stretching as much as you can. And eventually that will loosen up. The other option is to call your vet and be sure that you can get in and get a C-section. The next issue that you could encounter is malpresentations. So these could range anywhere from a breech animal to a transverse animal. What it means is that the animal is not coming out in a normal position. So you might ask, what's a normal position? A normal position would be both feet and head coming out first through the opening. So a malpresentation is anything that's not that. The first one we're going to talk about is twins and tangled legs. So a lot of times we might have a normal presentation, but it might be with twins. So we have a head of one twin and a leg of the first twin, a leg of the second twin with the head back. So what it might feel like to you is a normal presentation, but obviously we have 2 lambs that are all mixed up in there. So when you're pulling, be sure to feel that the lambs are connected to the head that you also feel. So when we talk about twins with tangled legs, it's actually gonna feel like a normal presentation, right? So I've got one head here, and I've got 2 legs. If you can see through there, I've got 2 legs. It feels like a normal presentation. One head, 2 legs. I go to pull and I have some resistance. Something is not right. So before I ever pull, I want to be sure that the legs that I feel connect to the head that I feel. So as you have your legs, be sure you run up the side. Yep, this front leg right here that I've got in my hand definitely matches this lamb. So I go to the other leg that I have, and it definitely does not match the one that I have. So when I'm in this situation, I want to go ahead and number these lambs. The one with the head, I'm gonna number 1, and the one with just the leg, I'm gonna number 2. So I'm gonna push lamb number 2 back if I can, as much as I can. And I'm gonna be sure I've got head number 1. I still have that leg number 1. And now I'm gonna go ahead and reach down and I'm gonna follow this head and try and get this second leg as much as I can and get that one popped up here so that I have both legs and a head. I can then start to pull and deliver this first lamb normally through the pelvic canal, through the cervix. Once I've got it out about, past the shoulders, past the rib cage, then I start pulling down towards her feet, wherever her feet may be, the ewe's feet, wherever they may be at that point in time. Obviously I have a second lamb in there, I already know that. So I'll go back in, I'll get the first 2 legs and the head, and then I can deliver this lamb normally. The next presentation that we're going to talk about is breech. So when we talk about breech, there could be multiple different presentations that are happening. So you could have nothing at all. You could have just the tail, or you could have one leg or two legs that are the back legs. When you're feeling for the back legs, you're actually going to be feeling for that hawk, that pointy elbow type that's on the back leg versus the front leg. That's how you're going to be able to distinguish the two when you're feeling. Obviously, the tail is going to feel like it has little vertebrae. In this animal, there's a little fake pearl necklace, so that's how that would feel. So when we talk about a breech birth, we have an option or we have a decision to make. Do we want to try and push the lamb back in and spin it around, or would we rather pull that lamb or kid backwards? In most instances, if you have a really old ewe, you might have some space to turn it around. A lot of times it's going to be easier to pull that lamb out backwards or kid. Today we've got a goat here. She's pushing pretty hard. We go back in and we feel we've definitely got back legs. I can feel on these back legs that hawk. It almost feels like an elbow point. It's really sharp and pointy compared to that front leg. And we've got a tail. I definitely know I don't have a head. So when I've made the decision that I'm pulling this lamb or kid backwards, we want to be sure that we're going fast. Once that umbilical cord snaps, that animal is going to be taking a breath of air, and that head is still going to be inside the amniotic fluid. So we want to be sure we're going as fast as possible. So when we're pulling breech, we want to be sure we've got all three items, 2 back legs and a tail. So when we pull, we want to be sure we're going fast as we can. Sometimes the tails will flip up and get caught on the pelvis and the tailbone of the ewe. So you want to try and keep that down as much as possible as you're pulling this animal backwards. Like I said, we want to be as fast as possible towards that end so that the nose and mouth of the animal is back out and breathing. Our third presentation that we're going to talk about is when the head is back. So the presentation would be just the 2 feet. That's all you could feel, or that's all you could see coming out at the back end of the ewe. So when we talk about that, we want to be sure we've got those front feet. If we don't, we obviously have a breech presentation, but when we talk about the head back, we've got those 2 front feet. When we're talking about having an animal with its head back and only the legs positioned, what you'll feel is just 2 front legs. Front legs, when we talk about them and when we compare them to back legs, front legs bend backwards and back legs bend forward. So as long as you know the position of the head, you're doing okay in that stance. So I know I've got some front legs here. I can feel a knee. They're bending forward, or excuse me, they're bending backwards towards the head of the ewe. But you know what? I don't feel a head here. So a good idea or a good practical solution for this is if we have the legs and we can get the legs actually outside of the ewe's body, this is a good time to use some twine or rope, get some strings attached to those before you push them back in. So you're gonna actually wanna push them back in and then pull this head down as much as possible. Get both of those legs, which you should be able to have a hold of them if you've got some twine on them. You should be able to find them pretty easy. Once we have all 3 of those again, we are able to deliver it normally. So this is all well and good when I tell you that you should just push that animal back in or flip it around, or just go ahead, push that back, flip this leg up. It seems easy, right? It's much easier said than done. This whole time the ewe is straining against you. She's having contractions. There's a lot of back pressure just from her body and her fluid. It's very warm inside the animal and it might be very cold outside, so you as a human also have that stress on you. So when you're working with the ewe, you want to be sure if you're pushing back in, go ahead and do that when she is not pushing. Once again, much easier said than done, but try to do it when she's not having a contraction. And the same goes for the opposite. When she is pushing, that's when you ought to be pulling, if that is an option for you. So in conclusion, remember that when you're actually in a situation where you're having to pull an animal, a lamb or a goat, we want to be sure that you're staying as calm as possible. Try to imagine what you're feeling with your hands. That's also going to help you to try and get through the situation. As a general rule, pick the person in your family with the smallest hands that can actually get up in there and try to maneuver and feel around. Like I said, it's not as easy said than done. We want to be sure that you realize that when you're in that situation to keep calm, cool, and collected.
Jackie, we've had multiple questions come through here. So while Brady gets ready to share screen the next presentation, would you like to answer a couple of those? Are you able to see them?
Yeah. So the first one I have is I have large hands and I'm worried about hurting the ewe. So that's very good point, right? So we want to be sure that we're not hurting her as much as possible. So my biggest suggestion is when you feel restraint, when you feel that you can't go any further, don't push it any further, right? So the other thing is that try to find someone with smaller hands if you can, and talk them through it as much as possible. On breech presentations, you say to pull it quickly. Does that hurt the ewe? Mother Nature doesn't like to do it fast. Is there something to wait for before we pull quickly? So once we've decided we're in that, we're gonna pull, right? Once we've decided we're gonna pull and I'm not gonna flip this one around, I'm actually going to pull it backwards. The actual act of pulling it quickly is just when we get that lamb out of the canal. So the rest of the time you can go slow, you can take your time, but actually getting it out. And think about it as a mother nature or a normal presentation. It would be just like that lamb kind of falling out of her if she were standing up, which is actually a fairly quick motion as well. Where do you place your hands on the lamb's head to pull it out with the legs? So this is a really good question. So I normally, I can take probably these two front fingers and I'll put a lamb leg between them, and then I'll put another lamb leg between the next two fingers, and I'll try to use my thumb and my pinky and my thumb to kind of guide that head out. So as long as you have a normal presentation and you've got not a head back situation, guiding that head out, and if you can seat it, if you can seat the head between the two legs, that's also going to give you some stabilization between there as well. So you won't have to worry about the head going from side to side because you've got kind of those bumpers of the two front legs. So that's when you're going to have to worry about working with that head. The last one I've got on the Q&A real quick is that my worst fear is the head comes out all the way with the legs back in. How do you get a large single head back in to get the legs? So this is a concern, right? Because it's very hard for us to think that, especially if you can kind of see it starting to breathe, we don't want to push that back in. But for the safety of the ewe, for the health of the ewe, we have to get that lamb out somehow, right? And a C-section at that point is not going to help us. So we do have to kind of shove that head back in. And then once that head is back in, and this is the same thing, we can put a kind of a tie around its head if we want to kind of push that lamb back in and to guide it up. I wouldn't say to cinch it really tight, but you can still use that as a guide while you're in there, because sometimes you can get lost with your hand in there. And if you have that kind of a loose string that's holding on there, you can use that to kind of find your way back and go back and get those front legs up as much as possible, and then put it all back together and come back out. I think we're going to go ahead and let Brady go.
And yes, we are. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Yeah, I'll continue to answer some if they come in.
Excellent. And we will have some time at the end if you have additional questions that come up during the presentation. So Brady, can you give us a little test on your mic?
Test. Everybody hear me all right?
Sounds excellent. We will turn it over to you.
Very good. Well, I apologize, folks, for the technical difficulties, and apologize to you, Jackie. I know you worked really hard on that video. And again, as Christine said, that video will be up online on our webpage. We appreciate your time and efforts with that. I think it was really beneficial to our folks. So definitely learned my lesson on spending about 8 hours in front of a microscope today. So, but other than that, we're all right to go. We'll go ahead and get into some more management topics in terms of managing colostrum and milk in those ewes as we begin to get those lambs and ewes ready for the lambing season, and also for our does when we come to kidding. The first thing that I want to point out is just understanding that, our third trimester really, and when we think about our small ruminants having that 147 to 150 day gestational period, we need to understand that this third trimester, that last portion of that pregnancy, is going to be a very nutritionally critical time period. And again, you can see that our requirements in terms of energy demands will increase greatly during this time frame. And you can see also as the number of fetuses and as well as the weight of the fetuses are going to increase exponentially during that time period as well. So before we start thinking about getting these ewes ready or does ready for lactation, we need to understand what's happening to them physiologically in order to prepare for that time period. So for late gestation, again, critical time period, and it's due to this fetal growth. Approximately 70% of all of our fetal growth is going to be occurring during this time. We should note that we do need to have an increase in energy content of our feedstuffs during this time period. So it's good to have these high forage diets for our ruminants. They're really efficient at converting those structural carbohydrates into energies that are needed, also feeding those ruminal bacteria. But we do know that during that time period, again, with that extreme fetal growth, our capacity for our internal organs, especially our digestive system, is going to be decreasing for those females, just simply due to the fact that conceptus is going to be taking up a lot of room. And then ultimately that's going to result in decreased feed intake. So in order to meet those demands of those third trimester females, we've got to supplement with some energy dense feeds, and that's primarily going to be in the form of grains. When we think about what we want to be feeding, think about our VFAs or our volatile fatty acids. Again, when we're feeding our small ruminants, we're not actually feeding the animal themselves. We're feeding those micro bacteria within the gut. And those bacteria, in turn, are going to turn those feedstuffs into VFAs or volatile fatty acids. And then our animals are going to be able to utilize those for energy and protein metabolism. When we think about our important VFAs, acetate and propionate, these are really going to be driven by our specific diets. Acetate is going to be primarily driven by some of our forage diets, whereas propionate is going to come from our grain or our corn diets. When we think about that, acetate is primarily correlated with milk fat. Propionate is going to be correlated with milk volume or yield. So when we're feeding these females, especially right after lambing or kidding, we want to make sure that we're providing a nice diet that has some highly digestible and high quality forages to promote milk fat production, because our lambs and kids consumption of those products are quite low. They're a small animal. Their tank is quite small during that time period. So it's important that we pack that lamb or kid's gut full of an energy dense feed. So we want to promote milk fat during that time period. And then as our lambs grow, we can start to increase that grain mixture to those females to promote more milk volume. We do know that improper nutrition during this time period, this third trimester, can lead to issues, one of which is going to be our preg tox or our ketosis. Also can result in poor mothering instinct and poor milk production. Also thinking about late gestation, we need to prepare that milk or that colostrum for those offspring as well. And this is a really great time to vaccinate our females in order to receive any type of passive immunity. Again, thinking about the effects of passive immunity and why it's important, I've got a really nice figure here that was provided by the Republic of Ireland, MSD Animal Health. And you can see that right here at lambing, we can see that these animals, specifically for these two types of diseases, Pasteurella and Clostridial diseases, if those females were vaccinated for those appropriate diseases, we can kind of see that passive production being promoted to those ewes. But imagine if this blue curve and green curve weren't provided in the form of a vaccine. We can see that our lambs virtually are born without an immune system, and they've got to develop it. Also, it's important that if our females aren't vaccinated, it really doesn't help us in the case of our lambs and kids if we're vaccinating those animals prior to 17 days of age. And you may be asking, why is this? Virtually, again, they have no immune system. They're not able to mount an immune response prior to 17 days of age. And so this time period is kind of critical. And it's really important to understand that if we really want to have some protective immunity against our animals or against our young offspring, we've got to start here at the ewe or the doe, right here at milking and lambing and kidding. And again, here we can kind of see that here, 3 to 6 weeks of age, we can start giving those booster vaccines, and we can see those titers begin to increase, and that's when our active protection begins. So again, as we start putting these animals into our systems, getting them into our jugs and getting them ready for lambing and kidding, we really need to evaluate that udder. We should, and of course, this is right after lambing and kidding. We really want to take a look at that udder, take a nice look at it. Really, we need to manually strip that udder so we can ensure that those waxy plugs are removed from each of those teat ends. When we think about conformation of that udder and teat, we need to ensure that that teat size is appropriate for our lambs and kids and that they're able to nurse effectively. I've got an example here of a goat teat that may be enlarged. It could be due to some issues. It could be an older doe. But regardless, we need to understand that those kids more than likely won't be able to nurse from this doe. And ultimately, how are we going to remedy this? Are we going to supplemental feed these kids? Are we going to milk her out, allow that structure to become a bit smaller so they can latch on? There's a multitude of ways that we can get around that. We should also make note of the first milk or that colostrum as well. Take a look at the color, the viscosity, the amount, and again, udder conformation. We did have some questions come in prior to the webinars here, and hopefully we're able to address them throughout our presentations. And again, if we haven't, feel free to shoot them to us there in the Q&A. But think about some of the diseases that can occur in our udders of our small ruminants. Of course, one of them is OPP on our sheep side of things, or ovine progressive pneumonia, just simply a deterioration of that animal. Symptoms or clinical signs can result in arthritic animals just not able to get around really well themselves, and then also poor milking ability or no milk production at all. So that's something that we need to consider. Subclinical mastitis. This may be a result of some scar tissue that could be previous damage from previous lactations, also known as hard bag. We can see a decrease in milk production, so you could have subclinical mastitis, and you may not be able to visually see it unless you were in a dairy situation where you're actually monitoring milk yield. And then, of course, we can have this clinical mastitis where we actually have the swelling, the heat, pain, and clotted milk. If any of these types of scenarios happen with our udders and any of our small ruminants, it's recommended that we call these animals as soon as possible, because some of these diseases can be transmitted to the offspring, especially OPP. And we also don't want these animals within our systems that are not performing to the ability that they're able to. There have been some questions of, what kind of antibiotics or what kind of treatments can be implemented when we have these issues. And it's highly recommended that we work with our local veterinarian or state veterinarian because you need to have a nice test to understand what you're dealing with. So for example, in a sheep flock, you may be dealing really with OPP, but you may be treating it as mastitis. Well, in that case, OPP cannot be treated itself, and then we're ultimately using antibiotics that shouldn't be used. So again, when we have any type of these udder issues or diseases that may be on farm, certainly encourage you guys to work with your local veterinarians in that manner. When we think about managing and preventing this disease, we need to ensure that we've got a clean environment. So practice good sanitation. Again, consult your local veterinarian for the antibiotics and remove those call animals as well. So getting right into, thinking about providing a good feed source to these young offspring to get them up and going. Colostrum, of course, is our most important. It's referred to as liquid gold. Timing of intake is absolutely critical. Offspring should either nurse or be fed that colostrum in the first few hours after birth, and it's simply due to the fact that this is a time-sensitive process. The gut is wide open, for a lack of better terms, right at birth. It allows for these large molecules to be readily absorbed by this animal, and these molecules are going to be some of our IGs or immunoglobulins. For example, down here I've got a couple of different papers that have been cited both in sheep and goats, and it's taking a look at IgG concentrations within a ml of milk. And as you can see, as time progresses post parturition, the amount of IgGs, or the concentration of IgGs, decreases over time. And this one we've got several hours. And this one here over to the right from Alvere's and others in 2015, we can see how drastically it decreases. So not only is it important from the standpoint of the offspring to receive that due to passive transport of these antibodies to be effective, but also the amount and concentration of these IgGs or immunoglobulins are also decreasing in the milk itself. Again, colostrum absorption is going to be most efficient directly after birth. We're going to say between the hours of 2 and 4 up to 6. Pretty poor at 12 hours after birth, and virtually non-existent 24 hours after birth. I also want to take a look at some other data provided by the same authors there in 2015. These folks took a look at some St. Ives ewes, and I will note that there were no differences when they compared these groups in age or body condition score. So therefore, regardless of their parity, whether they were yearling ewes, ewe lambs, or 12-year-old ewes, there were no differences in terms of age. And then also body condition scores. They didn't see any differences between those ewes that were body condition scores at 2, 3, and 4. Those were primarily the body conditions that they were monitoring during their testing period. But again, right here we can see that this is time post-parturition, and we can see that these are all in a natural log scale of hours, up to 5 hours. And you can see for our production, so amount of milk, our percent protein, and total solids are all going to be dropping as we approach that 5-hour period. So then again, that's why it's extremely important for these milk products to be readily consumed by our animals quite quickly, because they're the highest in total solids, protein, and actual milk production. And then also fat. Fat's going to be a nice energy source as well. Again, colostrum is going to be key to passive immunity. It provides supplemental energy to those lambs and kids. Our ruminant offspring are born with what we call brown fat, and that brown fat is the energy that they utilize to get warm, to get dry, and get up on their feet and find the udder. Once that brown fat is burned, and it's burned quite quickly, our animals become really energy deficient. So that's why it's crucial that we get this energy-dense colostrum into our animals. It also acts as a natural laxative to get that first meconium passed throughout their system. I've been asked recently what expected intakes would be for both colostrum and milk in general. And through our research online and through our publications, it's estimated that about 10% of the birth weight should be offered to that offspring within the first 24 hours of life. So 10% of its body weight. So for example, a 10-pound lamb or kid needs to receive about a pound or 16 ounces of colostrum at the beginning of life. Half of this should be received within the first 8 hours. And then we can also see that the recommendations are 4 feedings and 4-hour intervals as well, just to simply allow for that energy in that diet or in that milk to be spread out over the course of time. And then when we're thinking about milk in general, if we've got any type of bottle rearing that we need to do, milk intake is about a half to 1 ounce per pound of body weight. And then we've also got the conversion factor there as well. If you guys have to tube, which we'll talk about here in just a minute, 1 ounce is going to equal to 30 cc's. Supplemental feeding may be required during this time period, either bottle or tubing. This may be the result of a weak animal, prolonged labor, just simply wearing that both the mother as well as the offspring out, and mismothering. Whenever we're approaching the need for supplemental feeding, we always encourage that you attempt the bottle supplement first, because this will stimulate the suckling response of that lamb. And then again, we can tube if necessary. So I'm going to stop my sharing again, and we do have a nice video that we can provide. And Christine, I don't know if you want to try providing it or if you want me to share it and you talk over it.
Well, Brady, let's try it with the share screen feature on my end. So some of you may see that I'm here as a panelist in 2 ways. I am going to share screen this from a different device, so bear with me here while I get the sound settings right. Just one moment.
After determining that tube feeding is necessary for a lamb or a kid, make sure that the animal is not hypothermic and that you have all of your materials gathered. Start by determining the appropriate length for the tube to be inserted into the animal by finding the last rib. This will give you a guide of when the tube will be in the stomach. Next, if necessary, dip the tube into warm water or lubricate so that the tube will easily be swallowed by the animal. Again, make sure that all of your materials have been sanitized so that we don't accidentally introduce harmful bacteria in the process of tube feeding. Next, you want the animal to swallow the tube. Never force the tube down the animal's throat. The esophagus will lay closer to the left-hand side of the animal than the right. The animal should not struggle during this process. If it reacts violently or coughs, that's a sign that you may be going down the wrong tube. We want to make sure that we're headed down the esophagus. Continue to allow the animal to swallow the tube until the measured length that you determined by finding the last rib is reached. If the tube is warm, it should be easily flexible. If the tube has been inserted into the esophagus, the animal will still be able to bleat and cry. Check for appropriate placement by listening for stomach gurgle noises or for air movement. Air movement would signify that you may be in the lungs, whereas stomach gurgles will indicate that you're in the stomach. Next, attach the tip of your syringe and check for suction by pulling back on the plunger. There should be suction on the tube. If there is not suction and it moves freely, you're in the lungs. At this point, it is ideal to clamp the tube, remove the catheter syringe, remove the plunger, and reattach the catheter syringe to the tube again. Then allow the milk to flow freely by gravity into the animal's stomach. If you depress the plunger too quickly, you could cause the stomach to rupture, especially if you have air trapped in the tube. So proceed with caution and allow slow flow into the animal's stomach. Then clamp the end of the tube and remove from the animal's stomach. That helps you guys. After determining
I hope that the video played fairly well on your end. Brady, it's your turn again.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. So one thing that we also want to note that Christine was able to show, if we have to supplement our lambs or our kids with colostrum due to the fact that they don't have a suckling response and or weak themselves, is we want to recommend that we never tube feed a cold lamb or kid. It just simply does not benefit them. They're not able to utilize that nutrition that we're providing them. We must first ensure that they are warm in order for that process to work appropriately. So what's considered cold in our small ruminants? A normal body temp is going to be 102.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Mild hypothermia is going to be anywhere from 99 to 101, and then severe hypothermia is going to be less than 99. So if you've got animals that are in that mild hypothermia area and they're able to swallow, we recommend that you dry them with a towel and provide them with supplemental heat. You can put them into a hot box. There's several different types, methods, and models to be able to utilize with that, or simply put them underneath a heat lamp in a safe location. However, what if your animals are not able to swallow? They're unconscious or very weak. You can also utilize this method of doing an intraperitoneal injection of dextrose. And when we're doing this process, it's recommended to use a 2-to-3 solution, or 2-to-3 ratio solution. So 2 parts 50% dextrose to 3 parts of boiled water. That dextrose should be stored at room temperature. And once you are able to mix those two together, it will equilibrate to the appropriate temperature to be utilized. For those that are looking for more information on how to do this process themselves, you can take a look at the fact sheet provided by Alberta lamb producers that are provided on the OSU Sheep Team webpage. For colostrum, we need to think about orders of colostrum use, of course. For our lambs and our kids, the most essential or critical or important beneficial type of colostrum that we can use is going to be that one directly from the dam. However, what if the dam passed during parturition, or she simply has no milk? Older ewes and does within the flocks or herd will be appropriate at that time point. These older animals have the appropriate antibodies or bugs that your flock and herd has themselves. If that's not an option, any animal within your operation will work, with hopes that it's an appropriate animal that has a developed immune system. If we don't have any of those options at hand, we can utilize artificial colostrum, and it's really key to keep this on hand during these important time periods. We do have the ability to use goat or ewe colostrum for either or species that are a part of our flock or from other farms. And then also, when we think about just trying to get colostrum, we're in a dire need issue where we absolutely need the colostrum, but we don't have any of the aforementioned materials available to us. We can use cattle colostrum. However, there are some issues with using colostrums that are not associated with your species or your farm. Some of the issues that may arise are disease transfer, especially Johne's, just a chronic wasting disease that can occur due to the consumption of infected milk. This is certainly one of the biggest benefits of using on-farm colostrum due to the effects of passive immunity. Cattle and goat colostrum are good for our lambs, and then cattle colostrum good for our kids if it's available. But however, we do need to know that although it's a good source of immunoglobulins, it may be diluted. For our lambs, especially if we're utilizing cattle or goat colostrum, it does have a lower nutritive value in terms of protein and fat, so may not be nearly as effective. But again, in those periods of time of need where it's the absolute last option that you have available, those can be utilized. We also need to make sure we don't get tripped up between both Colostrum Replacer and Supplement. Colostrum Replacer is exactly that. It's designed to replace the colostrum that you don't have. It's a good source of our IgGs or IGs. However, it's not specific. But do be careful when you're buying these products because there is what we call colostrum supplement. And this is simply to be added to our existing colostrum if it isn't of high quality. And then we do encourage, of course, to have that saved colostrum. This colostrum can be saved from ewes that have an excessive amount of colostrum. You may be asking, well, what ewes or does are these? These may be individuals that had multiples at birth, but not all of the individuals were viable at that time period. So for example, we do know that a female that is designed to have twins and she's only going to be rearing a single due to maybe a stillbirth, she will produce naturally more milk than a single bearing ewe or doe. And as we go into larger litters, those females physiologically will be producing more milk. So just be on the lookout for individuals that may be good donors for our colostrum. We do encourage you to warm it up gradually. And of course, we don't want to put this in a microwave as this will kill the beneficial antibodies that are being provided in here. And we've also got an array of ways that we can save this colostrum. Of course, putting it in some of our smaller water bottles, these 8 to 12 fluid ounce water bottles allows us to thaw out a small amount each time without thawing out a large quantity of it. We can store it in our pre-made syringes. A lot of folks actually put it in some of our ice trays and they'll pop it out and put it into Ziploc bags. This is vacuum sealed. It works just as well. You can put it in a Ziploc bag as well. Make sure you put it in there and lay it flat because as we start to thaw that out, we expose as much surface area as possible to these bags to allow them to thaw out equally and evenly. And then also for our mothers out there that may have some of these bags left over from breastfeeding, of course, these are viable options as well. And then one point I did want to note before we ended the conversation about providing milk and colostrum to our animals. So say that we're able to effectively provide colostrum to a set of lambs or kids that may have lost their mother. Of course, the dam is going to be the most preferred and most effective. We may be able to graft some of those individuals off. But what if you're not able to graft these orphans or have multiples that these females simply can't provide enough milk to? We can provide it the supplemental feedings. There's several different delivery systems, bottles, buckets, and automatics, and that really depends upon your budget and how much you want to invest into your operation. And we've got a really nice set of resources on the OSU Sheep Team webpage regarding this specific scenario. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions before we go into our next presentation.
Thank you, Brady. We have a couple open questions here in the Q&A box. We have 3 actually now. We have one from Haley, which is, what is the minimum time from estimated lambing to vaccinate ewes so that immunity can be passed?
Right. So when we're thinking in that scenario of providing that protective immunity to our lambs via vaccine through the colostrum of our females, it's recommended that we're not giving those vaccines any later than 30 days out to parturition. And I realize that's quite difficult to do in some scenarios where we don't really have a great idea of what our lambing or kidding window may be. But anywhere from that 21 to 30 days prior to lambing and kidding is ideal to allow that female to process that vaccine and deposit those antibodies into the colostrum.
Brady, are you able to see the Q&A box? You can
I
choose
am.
whatever questions you'd like to answer in whatever order you feel best.
So we've got a question here that says, will a doe that has not kidded but is due soon to have colostrum to use? So let's see. Will a doe that has not kidded yet or yet kidded but is due soon have colostrum to use? It's certainly not recommended to be utilizing that colostrum from that female if she has not given birth yet, because that could certainly affect her production when we think about it down the road. And of course, we want to save that colostrum for the offspring that she is going to have. Is iodine necessary recommended on the umbilical cord? We'll talk about that a bit here in our next discussion, but certainly is. It's recommended that we do dip or spray our navels with iodine, and it's simply just a quick insurance policy. It takes a matter of seconds, and it really helps protect our animals from issues associated with joint ill, and they're simply going to be picking up these diseases from the bedding. They're naturally there. Again, just a really quick, simple process that can really help you in the long run. And then our last question here is, I froze colostrum from a ewe last year. How long will it stay good and frozen? So when it comes to colostrum from year to year, we do recommend that we get that colostrum used up within a year. So certainly if you have colostrum from 2020, it'll still be good during your 2021 lambing or kidding season. But beyond that, we would like to see your stocks be replenished from 2021 to be carried over into 2022. So about a year's worth when we think about this saved colostrum. Again, we don't have any solid research that shows the viability of these antibodies in these colostrum products. I'm sure there are folks out there that have used colostrum that's 2 or 3 years old because they had it left in their freezer just as a keepsake and just as their last resort. And that's certainly fine as well. But let's try to keep that stuff as fresh as we can.
I think that there's so many things that can happen over the course of a year or 2 or 3 where maybe the power's gone off and maybe that didn't stay at the ideal temperature the entire time, where the longer we wait, the more risk there is associated. But if the conditions are perfect, it should remain appropriate. Brady, it's now time to move into our lamb processing portion of the program. And then after this presentation, we'll be talking about creep feeders with Tim Barnes. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Some of you from a different time zone. We do apologize if you joined us at 7 p.m. Central instead of Eastern, but don't fear, we have recorded the webinar for you.
Very good. Thanks, Christine. And again, thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you find it beneficial and excited to keep learning with each and every one of you. So again, thinking about coming back to the idea of parturition and how we need to move forward, what supplies do we need to have on hand and how do we need to be prepared? So when we're thinking about prior to having our lambs and kids, think about getting these animals placed into the jugs or their pens, their holding facilities, whatever you want to call them, prior to or directly after parturition. When I have producers ask me, well, how many jugs or claiming pens do I need to have throughout my system? And that's really dependent upon the size of your flock or herd. And it's recommended that we have 10%. So therefore, for easy math, if you've got 100 ewes in your system, you should have about 10 lambing jugs or claiming pens within your system to be ready at all times. How long are we keeping these individuals in these pens with their dams? It's anywhere from 24 hours up to 1 week of age. And that's really going to be dependent upon the number of offspring, the development of bond, and if you really need the space, or if there's any other types of issues, whether you have a sick lamb, you have a ewe that may not be milking very well, or you have a scenario where something needs to have a bit more attention. It's certainly a lot easier to take care of them within these smaller areas. Supplemental heat, it will certainly aid in lamb and kid vigor, but we suggest that you avoid this artificial heat if possible. And I mean artificial heat in the terms of a heat bulb, right? Unless you have the facilities that you're able to do so. Many of stories we have heard of barn fires occurring specifically due to the result of a heat lamp falling, bursting, and so forth. For example, in this situation here, we can see that this barn's somewhat buttoned up. It appears to have some insulation up top. That certainly is a nice way to provide supplemental heat as well. So coming into the ideas of what supplies do we need, Jackie did a really nice job talking about some of the supplies that we need as we prepare for difficulty during lambing and kidding. Of course, thermometer is always nice. We don't need to go in and start treating some of our ewes blindly. What if they've got issues prior to lambing or kidding themselves? We need to have an understanding of what's going on. Are they running a fever? Are they running a bit cold? Are they right on? What other indicators can we have? Of course, our OB sleeves, our rubber gloves, use as much lube as you're possibly able to. If you don't have lube readily available in hand, you can use mineral oil as well. Trust me, it will help in your scenario for both you, the fetus that you're trying to extract, as well as the female. Disinfectants, so you're able to clean up your supplies, clean up the area in which you're working in, as well as soapy water. Paper towels are always nice, or some old rags or t-shirts that you may have. And then she also noted in her presentation, Jackie did, to have perhaps a leg snare or a puller. One kind of quick tidbit that I learned just recently from our colleagues down at the University of Kentucky was using a lanyard. I know that everybody here has participated in a conference at one point or another, and you were given a name tag, and associated with that name tag was a lanyard. Your lanyard's really nice. We think about some of these thicker lanyards. It just distributes your surface area over across a larger area. As we compare that maybe to a baler twine or maybe some of these snares or pullers that we've talked about in the past too, it allows for just simply a softer touch and perhaps will aid a bit better when it comes to pulling those offspring if needed. Some other supplies that is really nice to have on hand, of course, a stethoscope, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. We can pick these up offline on Amazon or wherever you'd like, pretty easily and pretty cheaply. It's really nice to see if we've maybe got some fluid on the lungs. Jackie again discussed that if we have a breech animal, we could have some issues where we do get some fluid inside if the umbilicus breaks prior to getting that animal completely outside. In those instances, a nasal aspirator would be nice to get that fluid and that material removed from that nose and that nasal cavity as well. Adoption supplies, that could be an option. Think about some musk. They do provide some components with our livestock retailers that are adoption musk that kind of mask the smell of our lambs. However, we have also found that simply a salt solution or a salt slurry where we dunk those lambs in a very warm salt solution kind of masks the smell of any of those lambs. And also it's very attractive to our females as well. They like the taste of salt at times. But ultimately, our slime graft, which we'll discuss here in just a few, is going to be some of our best management methods. Electrolytes for both our ewes and our lambs during these critical time periods. Basic care needs for our ewes post parturition. And that could be anything from, again, supplemental electrolytes, ensuring that they're in good condition, perhaps working with your local veterinarian if you had a difficult issue with some dystocia issues. Iodine is certainly a must when we think about keeping those navels nice and clean. An esophageal feeding tube that Christine had a nice video on as well is nice to have on hand, as well as some of these partridge nipples and simply a bottle to have those with. Some others that we need to think about is needles for administering any of our medications or our supplemental material that may be supplied via injection to our lambs. Anywhere from an 18-20 to a 20 gauge needle is certainly fine. Syringes, make sure that they're dose appropriate. If we're trying to give a dose of, let's say, um, selenium, and it only requires from our vet, a half a cc. It's certainly a lot easier to pull out half a cc in a smaller syringe when we compare it to maybe a larger syringe of 12 or 20 cc's. So again, make sure if we're focusing in on precision of that injectable material that we're using in a syringe that is most appropriate. And then also a drench gun is really nice to keep on hand in case we need to get supplemental water to some of those used during some of those cases. Some additional supplies that we can think about are supplements. Bow C is certainly appropriate. And again, think if this is appropriate for us. It is a recommended practice for us here, Eastern United States, especially here in the state of Ohio, because we are selenium deficient. But if we've got any viewers that are with us that are from out west, you do know that you have potentially issues with selenium toxicity because your soils have an abundant amount of selenium. So again, Bow C is one way that we can provide that to our animals. It is injectable, and it does require a vet script. So again, one of our supplies that we could talk about is having this appropriate vet client patient relationship, really critical when we're needing some of these materials for our operations. When we're providing selenium, we could provide that again in the injectable form, or there are some oral pastes if you don't have the injectable form available. Vitamin B complex, vitamins are certainly important. As our lambs start to grow quite rapidly, we can have issues with polio or listeriosis, and thiamine is the vitamin that is important during those diseases that may be needed. So you can either choose to have thiamine on hand, or you can have this vitamin B complex, which has thiamine in it. It has B12 for energy, and just a really nice vitamin, really complex to have on hand. You can utilize some of these energy supplements, Nutrigen, Survive, Mu Prime. These are all just brand names if you've ever seen them in any of your catalogs or online. Again, these materials are high in sugars as well as high in fats. So they're just providing fast, quick energy to these lambs and these kids to get them up and going. Again, we talked previously about the differences between colostrum replacer and supplements. If you have issues where you are having to milk out some of these ewes, personally in our operation, we've got a couple dairy ewes that we breed early, and that allows us to have some milk on hand, both in terms of colostrum and milk if we need to bottle feed some of our lambs as well. And this is really nice to have on hand as a quick little easy ewe milker, and you can find those online as well. And then hopefully we aren't in need of it, but there are certainly scenarios where we do have issues with prolapses. And it's always nice to have a prolapse harness on hand as well as a U spoon. We talked earlier briefly about the benefits of grafting and the way that we could do that with some of our supplies. Certainly a management practice that can save animals as well as labor. These are some of the suggested management practices to use when we're grafting our animals. Slime graft is simply using those fetal fluids from that dam's offspring. Just simply allows that animal that you're trying to graft smell, taste like the lambs that she just had. We can use this neonate coat where we can actually, if we had an offspring or a lamb or a kid die, we can actually skin them out and put that coat over top of that animal. Again, a lot of pheromones and a lot of scents within these skins, and this will trick that female into thinking that this is her own offspring, and she'll take that quite quickly as well. We talked about the benefits of saturated salt solutions. If you don't want to go through any of these processes, we can simply stanchion these ewes, put them in a head gate, and allow them to nurse. And there are other options as well. We also need to ensure that we're marking and IDing these animals appropriately. So some supplies that we may need are taggers. Make sure you've got your livestock marker or paint as well. A record book, and if your operation allows you to do so, record keeping software associated with EIDs, and those are really nice, nifty tools to have on hand. Some options that you have are ear tags, tattoos. We like to use tattoos in our operation because we do have purebred registered stock. You can easily lose an ear tag, but a tattoo will forever be with them. If we've got any La Mancha producers on here with us tonight, you will know that they will tattoo their tails. So again, a permanent form of identification. As we transverse out west, some of those bigger producers will utilize ear notching system, like in the swine industry. And again, thinking about some of these EID tags as well. What kind of production records do we need to be keeping during this time period? Of course, birth date, birth type, sex, weight, both the sire and the dam of that animal. We also need to associate that with a tag or a tattoo number, as well as the dam number. And a nice nifty tool that I've picked up from our friend Sandy Brock up in Canada is the color coordinate. So if you've got in your system, you could go through and you could mark all of your animals with one color that have singles. The next color will be for those that have twins, and so on and so forth. And then as you mark these animals, the U number could, her ear tag number or number that she's associated with, will go on her back, and that same number will go on the lamb's back as well. And of course, make some important notes during this time period. Issues with prolapses, those that are poor milkers or poor mothers, were they grafts, and also lamb vigor can be important during this time period as well. So there's three different processes that I want to quickly run through for the sake of time for tonight's discussion. And that's just really revolving around castration, tail docking, and disbudding. Why are we doing it? Some of the science behind it, and kind of wrap up from there. So of course, castration of our lambs and kids, preventing unwanted breeding, decrease male aggression, and improve meat quality. But in some of our systems here in the Eastern United States that are being sold into these ethnic markets, we may not have an issue with any of these listed criteria. So really, should this be practiced? We know if we leave these males intact, it will increase growth of these animals. We have better growth efficiencies for them. When should it be done? Certainly 7 days of age, 14 in some scenarios. We want to, of course, ensure that both testicles have dropped. Nothing worse than having these animals castrated and only being able to get one of them, and then we have a retained testicle and have issues with cryptorchidism. In breeding stock scenarios, we do know that some of this is extended because we want to assess what animals we may be keeping for breeding and which ones we would like to wether. So if you do decide to go a longer time frame or time period when it comes to castration, please consider pain management. And again, it's really important when we're castrating these and making these into wethers that yes, our males do have these small teats associated with them as well, and we need to ensure that we don't get that into the rubber band. These are the different forms of castration, the Burdizo and the Elastrator. These are considered the least painful when they're combined or used individually prior to 7 days of birth. And then also, we do have this surgical method, but it is also considered one of our most painful methods that we use. Taking a look here from these folks in 1998, just really quick, I wanted to take a look at the differences when we think about pain management in these animals, taking a look at different types of castration methods. We have one here that's INT. These are males that remain intact. RR is our rubber ringed or our rubber ring elastrator bands. BC is our Burdizo castration, and our IF is just simply our intact females. So these females are just there as a control as well. And as you can see here, as we start taking a look at actually average daily gain, you can see there's really no differences as we go through weeks 1 through 12. We do see that there's some differences in terms of daily weight gain, and these again are in grams per day of weight gain. You can see that, of course, castration will result in some decreases in weight gain when we consider them or compare them to their counterparts that have not been castrated at all. But these, again, are two really easy, simple methods that we can use for castration. But again, I encourage you to think, is it really necessary or is it needed? Tail docking. Why are we tail docking lambs specifically? It's going to prevent fecal soiling, a cleaner environment, and it reduces issues with fly strike and excessive moisture around the bum of that animal. Again, we could think about, should this be practiced or should this be considered? Perhaps you've got some sheep that are naturally have short tail breeds. For example, one of them be our fin sheep. Also, again, our ethnic markets like having these animals that are unaltered or unblemished. So if that's a market that you're interested in going into, you may consider keeping those tails on those individuals. Again, it should be practiced anywhere from 1 to 7 days of age. It's really easy to throw an elastrator band on these animals as soon as they leave the lambing jug. Beyond this time frame, we should consider pain management. And then also, I encourage you guys to inspect your lacerator bands. It's easy to keep these supplies from year to year. These are rubber material. They can become brittle. We want to ensure that these bands are going to stay on these individuals because they could break halfway throughout the process and allow some of that infection from that necrotic tail back into the animal. And we certainly don't want that to happen. Again, I just wanted to briefly discuss some of the different ways that we can go about tail docking with our lambs. The elasterator band, the same way that we did with our castration. There are some electric dockers with a hot blade on it where it will cut it and cauterize it all at once. And then we have a Burdizo in the emasculator where it will just simply crimp and crush and cut that tail off. Do want to note the importance of tail length. We really want to see these animals have some type of coccygeal or tail vertebra associated with their tail dock. This is considered to be a longer tail dock, but may be important when we go out west and it may be a little hotter, especially when you talk to my Australian advisor in the hot Australian outback. And again, think about how short we want to dock these tails. What markets are you involved in? I understand that this could be, some individuals may be interested in docking them a bit shorter, but certainly there are increased risk with rectal prolapse. And for those that want to see some of the data, this project was performed by Thomas and others in 2003. And what's really interesting is that a lot of this research occurred here in Ohio, both at our Columbus and our Worcester research branches. And you guys will be able to come back and take a look at this video and pause it if you wish. But it took a look at the lambs and the treatments. This was short, this was medium, and this was long. Short castrate or short tail docking was as short as they possibly could go. Medium was, if you think about that coccygeal fold on that tail itself, they were going midway on the coccygeal fold, and long was at the very end of that coccygeal fold, so leaving about a 2 to 3 inch tail on them. But you can see throughout our processes here, we had more prolapses, more treatments, and more issues with the shorter the tails went, regardless of where these systems were. And then also when we think about castrating and tail docking, these are painful procedures and we need to understand this and, what methods are the most appropriate to reduce the amount of pain that is being associated with these animals. Graham and others in 1997 evaluated this and they did it based upon behavior. You can see it was restlessness, foot stamping, head turning, total activity. We've all seen it. Our lambs bleed a little bit when we take those tails off. And we can see that actually rubber ring is going to be considered some of the most painful procedures. So that's why it's critical that we do this as early as possible. And again, when we were considering should we use a analgesic for this, that's either going to be lidocaine or meloxicam. We can get these from our local veterinarians. We do know that if we don't use any type of analgesic, it is a painful procedure. We do have an increase in activity, but as we apply some of these analgesic products to them, we can see that this total behavior or painful behavior does significantly decrease. Last one I want to talk about is related to our kids and our goats. And if that's for disbudding or dehorning our animals. And of course, this is just simply the removal of that horn bud. And the reason for this is to decrease really injury, and that's to both the handler as well as the other animals within the system. But again, we need to consider, should this be practiced? With our goats, our horns actually act as our regulator system or a radiator. It allows them to expel excess heat within that because it is highly vascularized. So we need to consider, if we do choose to take the horns off of these individuals, we need to be prepared to supply some type of supplemental cooling to these animals. When I took a look at the research, it was telling me anywhere from 4 to 21 days of age is when this procedure should be practiced. Now, this was breed dependent, and I know that for certain breeds, their horn development and growth varies. So this is going to be highly dependent upon the breed that you guys are working with. There's two different methods, the hot iron or cauterization. Some pros and cons to this method is it's really easy, effective, and fast. It can't be rubbed off with like our situation of our dehorning paste, and it reduces, and you can really reduce pain using these analgesics, again, either in the form of lidocaine or meloxicam or whatever you're able to get available to you. Some of the cons is that it does require some training because we don't want to harm these individuals. Some potential harm that can be done if done incorrectly is some brain damage ultimately. So we need to make sure that we're applying the right pressure for the right amount of time. The other alternative method would be this budding paste. Some of the pros and cons to this, a pro is that it's really easy to use. We can apply this, but ensure that you do it with a pair of gloves for both you and the handler that is helping you because it is very caustic. And again, we can reduce some of the pain using these analgesics that we can get a hold of. Some of the cons are that it will rub off as our animals start to rub their head, maybe associated with some of those painful behaviors, and there is some prolonged pain involved. So our analgesic treatment must be kept up. And again, here's some of the data from these folks in 2010 that show here that when that analgesic is provided during disbudding, we can see that those that don't have the analgesic do demonstrate higher cortisol levels, which would be an indicator of stress. And those that that are disbudded with our analgesics show this really smaller baseline or a much lower cortisol. This stress is more than likely associated with handling and administration of that analgesic rather than the procedure itself. So with that, we'll just wrap up with, are there any other things that we might consider? And I kind of pulled these out of the toolbox from my experience, both from teaching here at Ohio State and some of our personal issues that we've encountered over the years of sheep production. One of them being entropin. This is going to be our inverted eyelids. This is certainly a genetic issue. You need to go back and I would consider where this is coming from. You may think about calling both of the parents. Perhaps it's only due to the new ram that you're bringing into your system, and I would be calling him. This can be remedied, it can be fixed, but we would suggest that you consult your local veterinarian. Splinting can also be something that you may encounter as well, broken or deformed legs. And again, repetition is the key to learning. And think about vaccines in these lambs. Don't waste your money vaccinating these lambs prior to the 17 days of age. They don't have an immune response at that time period, and virtually you're wasting your vaccine. So make sure that we're vaccinating during the appropriate time periods. So with that, I'll jump off of here. I'll stop sharing my screen here. I'm happy to take any questions as Tim gets his video ready.
Brady, I think let's do one question here while Tim gets his screen share up, and then we will save these other two either for the end or you can respond in the Q&A directly to them. Take your pick, anyone that you'd like to address.
I tell you what, for the sake of time, we'll just let Tim get with it, and we'll answer them at the end.
Okay, Tim, as
Hello, Tim Barnes, Marion County's Extension Ag Educator. Today we're going to talk a little about lamb creeps, their design, and how that'll help you produce a bigger, healthier lamb. Location is always the first decision. Some of that depends on how big your flock is. You may have small groups of ewes, 5 or so with their lambs as you group them by age, and then some producers may have as many as 25 or 30 ewes in a group. So you're going to size your creep accordingly. You can put it up in the corner of the pen, up along the barn sides. Some people are using these self-enclosed creeps that work good in the center of the pen. Make sure it's easy for you to get to add feed and just put water and hay in. Natural lighting's great during the day, but at night you probably do want a low wattage light bulb to help the lambs. It might draw them in there a little bit so they start eating a little quicker. But this self-contained unit I talked about, if you're not familiar with those, the creeps at the back, the areas there where the lambs can get in and rest a little, and then the nice gate that you can adjust the size coming in and out. If you're on a 60-day weeding program, you think on down the road at 60 days, some of these lambs will be in the 60, 70 pound range. So kind of want to keep that in mind when you consider the square footage you're going to allow for those heavier weights. Make sure you have your creeps set up when the lambs are 7 to 10 days old. I think that gets them in there, gets them started nibbling around on the feed a little bit, but it's great to get them off to a good start. Ventilation is key, especially if you normally have a little more manure pack as we get later in the spring. Remember the ammonia smell, can be detrimental to these lambs at the younger ages. But again, your design fits your situation the best, and go with it. Feeders can be as simple as these kind of the cups off of the old elevator, just attached to the side of the pen. Small trough feeders work great. You can clean those out as the lambs get bigger, and if you have a bigger group, we used for several years the old rotary hog feeders, and hay attached to the side here, or you can have the ones that hang on the gate. A little bit of hay, their digestive system isn't going to allow it to use it till they get closer to 30 days of age, but it's great to have it in there, gives them something to nibble on. Remember, water consumption isn't going to be great until the lambs get a little older, because they're getting a lot of water out of the milk of their mother, but keep them clean water in there to get them started. The entrance, any number of ways to doing this. I think we're seeing more and more of these adjustable feeders where the metal rod can go down through PVC or through metal piping. They give a roller action as the lambs go in and out. Keep it narrower for the younger lambs, and then you can spread it out as these bigger lambs get bigger, closer to weaning. Guys that are selling a lot of lambs, especially club lambs, may have a gate in there where they can pen the lambs in for a while each day. Get them used to that, then they're easier to get in and out of there. Good adjustment of the creep gate just makes it easy for those big lambs to come in and out. Again, you may have to make the adjustment a little wider, especially those big singles, but you want them to eat. We all have the problem that skinny one that has twins probably on her that can somehow get in the creep. Here's a quick remedy for that. You can see just 3 short pieces of wood screwed together. Put that around her neck. She can drink, she can eat hay, and she can eat grain, but she can't get in your creep to eat all the creep feed. In summary, creeps are just a great management tool. We have fabulous genetics nowadays. If you want to get the fastest rate of gain, get the lambs to market the quickest, use your creep.
Now address any current questions or those that are still pending. Great, Tim, we can hear you. Brady, we can hear you. And Jackie, if we have additional questions for you. We are all here and we will stay on until we get these questions addressed. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're very impressed with our participation and spread, and I'll turn it over to our presenters now.
Very good. Christine, I'll go back and try to wrap up some of these Q&A questions from some of my previous talks. And the first of which...
Hey, Brady, tip your mic down. There you go.
Go. How about that?
Yeah.
So I'm going to answer just a few of these questions from the previous presentation, Christine. And the first of which is, do I need to have all my sheep in stalls when they lamb? We have a few for emergency. And certainly lambing jugs are not needed in your lambing situation. It's just, it's a nice practice to have. It ensures that the bonding development occurs quickly and appropriately between the dam and the offspring, and allows them to get away from the rest of the herd and the flock. So it's a nice tool to have, but if your animals are able to do it on their own in the corner of the barn by themselves without any type of intervention, we certainly encourage that as well from a natural behavior standpoint. Let's see. It keeps moving on me. How does castration improve meat quality? Again, with our lambs here in the eastern United States, we're typically getting them sold less than 6 months of age. But as we become, larger and we get these rams to be a bit bigger and approach sexual maturity, we can have issues with some off flavors associated with increased levels of testosterone. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that it's not recommended if you're wanting to do some home butchering or home practicing to go out and just harvest your oldest mature ram that you have on the farm. There are some off flavors associated with that. Again, that can be part of the management. It could be an increase in forage in their diet. It could be age and sex as well. Let's see. When feeding grain in the final months of pregnancy, particularly in catodons, can overfeeding be associated with increased prolapsing? It certainly can be, but we need to kind of scale back and think about what other management practices are occurring during that time period. Again, that's a critical time period in fetal growth. A lot of those nutrients are going to be directed towards those fetuses or that conceptus itself. When we start increasing that feed, of course, if we have that system really full and bulky from a bulky feedstuffs or a lot of hay, when these animals cough, there's just physically nowhere else for it to go but out the rear end. And unfortunately, that's how that occurs. So if you're able to do so, provide a bit denser feedstuffs at a lower rate to still maintain those appropriate nutrient levels, and that will free up some space internally for those animals. And again, ensuring proper airflow is going to help. Ensuring that you have decreased amount of dust will also decrease the issues associated with coughing and therefore prolapsing. Tim, it looks like there's a question there for you. What is some good options for creep feed?
Yes, no, there sure are a lot of options when you go out there now. And creep feeds right today with the price of soybean meal and corn tend to be, a little higher than they have been in the past several years. But as long as to start your lambs on creep, I think you want to stay around that 20% crude protein. And most of the creeps are that way. It just easy to get them started with. An old trick is if you're just having trouble getting them started, is just some plain 44% soybean meal. Just sprinkle it in there, and lambs love to kind of chew on that. Then they get a taste of the pellets. So yeah, a lot of options. I guess be cost conscious a little bit and just try to stay in that 18 to 22%. Pelleted or textured, I prefer to start them out with a pellet, and a mini pellet is that smaller design pellet that's a little easier for the lambs to chew on.
We have a couple questions in the chat box. I'm not sure if you guys are seeing those, but we have one questioning about those that repeatedly ram new kids and talking about socializing in the flock.
Do we mean they are aggressive towards other lambs and or kids within the flock or herd, or against their own? We'll have Kate see if she can hit us with that in the chat box. But there's another one here from Nancy, and she says that you talk about the feeding of ewes prior to lambing. I've seen several articles of ours talking about feeding whole shelled corn. Do you recommend shelled corn even through most mixed feeds have cracked corn? And certainly you can talk to one of my co-advisors, Dr. Francis Fluharty. He's done 30 plus years of research here at Ohio State, and over his tenure during that time period, he's yet to provide any type of data or results that show or indicate that cracked corn is more efficient than whole-shelled corn. Whole-shelled corn is really efficient for our sheep. The way in which they consume their feeds is much different when we compare them to cattle as such. Sheep tend to chew a lot more, and again, all the data that we have provided is that whole-shelled corn is our most efficient option. My theory behind most purchase feeds have a lot of cracked corn in them is one, that's how a lot of our other livestock species are fed, and then two, it increases the cost of your feed on the supplier's end. So whenever you process any of these feeds, and cracking may not seem to be a lot of processing, but it's still an additional step, they're able to charge more for that product. So yeah, I would certainly recommend switching over to that whole-shelled corn diet. It's also less dusty as well when you're feeding. Kate got back with us here. She says that they ram other kids are fine with their own, and that's just simply due to the fact that that doe is being very territorial. And really, that's a good doe. That's a nice doe to have within the herd. She's protecting the resources, aka milk, and only supplying those to her own kids. And unfortunately, there are some of those that are simply just like that. So if you see some of those issues continually occurring, you could seclude that individual away from the rest of the herd. I know that it requires a bit more management, but she's simply just protecting those resources for her own offspring. Christine, are there any questions that we may have missed?
We have another one now in the Q&A box. It is, I have one ewe who will be lambing 2 months after the rest of the flock. Any issues to watch for?
So I guess this is probably mine. I wouldn't say there's any particular issues to watch for, but just keep in mind your management strategies, right? So you've one ewe that's after the rest of the flock. So getting it weaned in a group with the rest of them is probably going to be pretty hard. And just also keep in mind your weather atmosphere that's happening there. If you get into some of those warmer months, we want to be sure we're looking out for fly strike and just keep in as much control on the bugs and other internal external parasites that we can be having in those types of months.
I agree, Jackie. The only thing that I would add to it is that we need to know how we're managing her. If we're managing her along with the lactating females, she could have too much nutrition and ultimately have a large lamb and have some complications. We've got another question here, Christine, saying, when I talked about whole shell corn earlier in my explanation, can we use harvested field corn from our own grain operation? 100%. That's all that material is, just simply that corn that's ran through the combine and put into the bin.
Just be sure you're checking your moisture. You don't want to store corn that's too wet.
And if you've got issues like Central Ohio is having this year, I would take a look at some of your toxin levels as well. If you have issues with toxins, certainly don't be feeding that to our pregnant or lactating females, because we will decrease production. We also may create some issues down the line in terms of abortion. So work with your local feed mill to get that tested and see if we need to adjust our feeding programs. My dominant ewe is headbutting one of the other pregnant ewes. Should I be concerned? Yeah, if it's a repetitive process and it continues throughout your operation, just continually keep an eye on that individual. Roughhousing and continual, I guess, dominant behaviors could result in abortion. So we just want to make sure that ewe is being safe, and just keep an eye on her if we're able to reduce the risk with that.
Our next webinar is focused on nutrition, so we're starting to get a lot of questions specifically related to nutrition, and that's great. We'll briefly answer those tonight, but please come back for webinar 2, where we will specifically talk about nutrition all night long.
Let's see.
One of the questions I see on here that I think I've heard multiple times is the selenium oral paste as good as injected?
I think this is an answer for a veterinarian. When it really comes down to it, you know, you'd really want to be sure you're having that really good relationship with your veterinarian. I can tell you that injected is obviously going to be a faster method. So if you need it right away, you definitely need that. The oral paste obviously has to go through that digestive tract before it gets into the body.
Christina,
Good
I'll
answer.
address. Yeah, very nice. Christina, I'll address the question here for the new ewes. Do they need extra feed, nutrition, or just regular grain and hay? And that's really a loaded question. There's a lot more information that we need behind this scenario. We need to know the type of sheep that we're raising, specifically our weight. And one nice resource that I like to use is our NRC. And our NRC will tell us the nutrient requirements of our animals at any given production stage. So some information that I can certainly follow back up with this producer here. Feel free to send me an email with more information, and we can kind of walk you through the nutritional requirements of your flock during that time period. It's really difficult to know how much is needed at a given time unless we know what we're feeding, because animals do require feed at a percentage of body weight based upon stage of production.
Brady, I do want to jump back real quick to that selenium question.
Sure.
Be sure that you are looking at your bottle. BOCI is actually not recommended for pregnant ewes, and it says that right on the bottle. So we want to be sure when we're talking about the oral versus injected, it really kind of depends on what type of animal you're giving that to.
Good point, Jackie.
Good clarification too. And whenever in doubt, stop and read the label first, and then if that's not clear to you, contact your veterinarian. Hopefully, if you're really into this business for production purposes, you're going to have a relationship with a veterinarian. We certainly recommend that for every livestock producer out there. There's some things you'll hope to solve at home on your own, but there's some things that you are simply going to get caught needing a vet's help. So have one, have a current relationship with them, and so you don't get caught in that situation.
Another question here, Christine, revolving around toxins. What happens if you do have toxins in corn? I would highly suggest that you work with your local nutritionist or whoever you may work with when in developing your diets. They'll be able to lead you down the correct path in terms of how to remedy that, whether that be some additives to add to your feed or be able to locate you a new source of corn that has a reduced level of toxins within it. Recommendations for a good record keeping software. This producer uses paper and pencil now. I'll open it up to all of you here, panelists that are also shepherds. What would you recommend? For me, Excel works really nicely. We just recently got into the Shearwell system, and that's worked out really nicely with the EID tags. But you just need to really understand what, I guess, your return on investment is. How many sheep do you have, and can you spread the costs over the number of animals that you have for a given amount of time? So really whatever your budget allows you to do. But first and foremost, from paper to pencil, I would think that the easiest transition would be the Excel file. You can sort data, you can add columns up, you can see what your average daily gain is. A really efficient and easy tool to use.
I would echo Brady. Excel for sure, and especially if you have multiple people on your operation, you could use it very easily like Google Drive. You could share that Excel document so everybody has access to input data onto that if needed. We personally use HerdBoss as well, and we do have that shared account on multiple different phones for our operation so that anybody can track that information that needs to be tracked.
I still am using pencil and paper. I've used the computer programs, but as we're down to 30 ewes, I just keep a notebook for each year. I can include breeding with the lambing, and works for me.
I would just chime in here on whatever platform you choose to use, make sure that it has internal storage of your records, or easy to download data because things change over time. A lot of these software programs will have startup grants and they'll be heavily funded at the beginning and start to fall apart in the maintenance stage. So while they may work really well at the beginning, looking into the future, you could have some issues pulling your records from the system if it's not well established. So I'm a big believer in save it once, save it twice, save it 3 different places, and maybe keep a notebook too, because you just never know what might happen, and you certainly don't want to lose years of your farm records. So whatever system you choose, I hope it has a downloadable Excel file and that you print it out and put it in a binder somewhere, just in case you can't get on the computer.
We've got a question here, Christine, that says, where do we find the NRC? Simply go online. I'm taking a look at my book right now. I've got it through my studies here, being in my last year of my PhD, but it appears that their web address is just www.nap.edu, and I can put that in the chat box for us as well. And the most latest version that we have available for us is the small ruminant NRC from 2007. And this is going to cover our sheep, our goats, our cervids, as well as our camelids.
We had a question in the chat about recommending a good sheep nutritionist. And I would encourage other attendees on the webinar to maybe share people that you've worked with and know and really like. But I would say from a university standpoint, we can't specifically recommend one entity over another to try to remain unbiased. But if you would like to talk about that separately, attendee to attendee, that's certainly encouraged.
And come to the next month one, where we talk about nutrition the whole time.
Yes.
Absolutely. We've got a lot of questions here still coming in, folks, and we have a lot still on the webinar with us. So we'll continue until you're ready to quit. And yes, just to echo, the join link for our next webinar is the same. So if you successfully registered for this one, all you need to do is click the same link to join us for our next webinar. And if you need to share this with a friend or a neighbor, it's the same link to register as well. All 3 webinars have the same information. So don't miss the next one.
And Christine, will they get an email as they did this evening as a reminder prior to the next webinar?
Yes, you will. You should receive a reminder just like you did today prior to the next webinar, which I put in the chat. Let me repeat that again. It will be Tuesday, February 16th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're so pleased to have people that aren't from Ohio. So apparently we need to clarify the time zone next time we promote our event.
We've got an interesting question here, Christine, that says, what does your typical yearly schedule relationship involvement look like with your vet? And I think that's just going to be highly dependent upon your operation and your needs, as well as the relationship with your vet. I know in some cases, more vets are more interactive with their clientele, and that's certainly important to have and to understand. So again, make sure that you locate a vet that is able to work with you efficiently and effectively. There simply are some that click and some that don't. So just be sure that you find that person that works well for you and your operation needs.
I'm very blessed to have one of the owners of my flock. My sister is our veterinarian, so I can't answer that question. I work with her literally probably every other day we talk. So I can't tell you how a normal relationship works.
We've got one question here, guys. It says, where can I get a scale to weigh my ewes? I'm not a large scale operation. Tim, Jackie, do you guys have any recommendations on where you can find cost-effective scales?
Yeah, they're not cheap to purchase if you buy the sheep or the small animal scales. But if you only have to weigh one ewe, maybe somebody that you have a neighbor that could help you out, and a guesstimate might accomplish the same goal if you're trying to figure out what weight range they are in. But If you think you need scales to weigh all your lambs to have weaning weights and things like that, it will be a several $100 investment. And most of the sheep supply companies around the country have that option in their catalogs.
I know quite a few people who have that went to Amazon or online in general and has found, a large dog scale, maybe that you've seen in your veterinarian's office, and that works pretty well. Another good place that is, if you want to look into purchase some used equipment, there's lots of always used equipment on the Facebook, on different equipment pages that you can see there as well.
And to kind of echo it, the only other suggestion I'd be is that there's always farm sales across the nation. You may be able to pick up a really nice set of used livestock scales, whether those be balance beam scales or digital scales as well. So just keep your eyes peeled for those types of opportunities. Facebook Marketplace is a wonderful tool. Let's see. Here's an interesting question, guys. Do you think that the RFID tag will become standard for sheep as it is going to be for cattle? Thinking of when it makes sense to switch over. 100%, whether that's, next year or 20 years down the road, being able to have access to the data in tracking our animals will be important, and it certainly will come. I can't tell you when it will, but I think it will down the pipeline within our lifetime.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, it'll be here real quick.
Let's see. Another question here is, what is your best go-to book for either sheep and or goats for this stage of life cycle? And I think it was the one that you referenced the most, Jackie, and that's going to be the American Sheep Industry Handbook. And I'm in my office here. I'm going to slide back and grab it.
It's big and green. Mine's green anyways. I imagine yours is green, Brady.
Yeah,
Yes.
the original ones were green. Yeah.
Yes, let me see if I can get in here. So this is the Sheep Production Handbook, and this can be purchased online through the American Sheep Industry. And what's really nice about these newer versions is that if you take a look online, you can either get the hardback itself, but I chose to get the hardback version. But I also have the little USB drive in it as well. So I've got this downloaded to my computer in PDF files. So it's really accessible, and it's really nice tool to have on hand. I reference this when I teach my undergraduate students here at Ohio State, and also when I'm giving any type of recommendations to any of our local producers.
The other thing, which is, it's completely off topic, maybe it's more of a next webinar one, but they have really good colored pictures of toxic plants as well.
Yes. As well as clinical signs of diseases that you could see in some of your animals as well. I think it's a really nice comprehensive book that gives you everything that you need.
Correct. Very much so.
Can you guys confirm what the most recent date of publication is for the manual? I think I have the link here.
This one here that I have is volume 8, and it's 2015, and I don't think they have a more recent version. I think that is the most recent version.
It looks like that's what I'm seeing too. So I'm going to put that link in the chat right now. It looks like it's $99.
It's well worth the investment.
I had purchased it as my book for when I was in college, but yes, there's lots of sticky notes and highlighter all over it from my days.
And good information from researchers across the nation. I guess being a bit biased, Dr. Bill Shulaw is in there, and he's referenced quite a bit. So a really great sheep producer. What else do we have here, Christine?
Well, I had to take a moment there to say goodnight to my daughter. So I'm not sure, did we answer this question about selenium deficiencies in Michigan?
No, I'm getting to that right now. It uploaded for me. So I'm in Michigan, selenium deficient. The Demore feed has selenium. Should I give free choice Demore minerals, which also has selenium, or can it be too much selenium? So I assume here this producer is providing a complete feed to their animals, and that feed on the label says that it has added selenium to that product, whether that be a mixed ration or a pellet itself, and they're wanting to give free choice mineral to their animals as well. Certainly, we recommend that animals be offered free choice mineral. There's going to be differences in individuals. Some may need more than others. What's really nice about the supplementation rates of a lot of these minerals and vitamins in our products is that they are below a certain threshold. So I wouldn't have any concerns or issues with providing free choice mineral with your general diet. Any suggestions, Tim or Jackie?
I
No,
mean,
go.
I think, yeah, the whole free choice thing is very, they kind
Very
of, they keep
standard.
it themselves. Yeah.
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 Yep.
Yeah. And for here, for us in Ohio, but like you mentioned out west, you would look at it a little differently. Yeah. Did we answer the one about the big lambs? Brady, do you see that? And I'm getting bigger lambs this lamb crop. The only thing I
That was
changed.
in the chat box, so you may have missed that one.
Sorry. I've got one in the Q&A here. Is it the starter flock question?
No, this
Nope.
was,
It's
but
different. It was a Columbia breeder. Go ahead, Tim, take it.
which one? Well, I
The-
think both of them are interesting. The bigger lamb, I guess my first question would be, are you having more singles, which naturally probably would lead to having bigger birth weights? I don't know unless you're having, symptoms of some mineral deficiency that it would really affect the health of through the gestation of the ewe to end up with lambs being so big. Genetics would be the second thing I would say. Naturally, some rams tend to sire, have heavier birth weights, just like we see in the cattle, and a lot of information goes into that. So I would think either genetics or lower lambing percentage might have more to do with it than any question of minerals.
The other key point that I kind of want to pop in there is weather is going to help. Weather and nutrition combined are going to really affect your size as well. So even though you say your nutrition hasn't changed, I understand, right? Like you still are feeding the same stuff, but guess what? It's probably new corn or different corn. So the actual protein content of that corn or the starch content, the energy content could be different from the year before, just depending upon where that corn was sourced.
What I'm hearing in our discussion is that it's much more likely those factors than it being the mineral as the causation of having larger lambs. So
Right.
there's many factors that could be the actual cause, but it's probably not the mineral program.
And I'd also encourage, again, referring back to that NRC, what is the size of your ewes, and what are their daily requirements in terms of energy and protein? And perhaps, as Jackie noted, our feedstuffs may be of higher quality. That's why it's important to test our feedstuffs. And perhaps in that scenario, we're simply overfeeding them. We've got one here. The general aspect of the question is that this individual received a starter flock from out west, and the sheep are very skittish and very scared. They've certainly gotten better or adjusted to their climate with this new young shepherd themselves, but they're interested in if they can expect any issues with overly skittish or scared ewes when they're going to lamb, or will they settle down when they're ready. I really think it's just time. Just give them time. Think about the management system that they were brought from out west. They had minimal contact with people. They also have traveled from west to east, different management. It's going to take these ladies a bit of time, and especially if they're older individuals, but it says these are yearlings as well. So give it time, encourage positive reinforcement, positive interactions with those ewes, and they should begin to settle down. When it comes to lambing, they may have that natural instinct to seclude themselves like they would out west. The ewes may be a bit aggressive because they are protecting their offspring. So it's really hard to tell how these individuals will behave and how they will react, but we'll be able to know once it comes that time.
We got one more question here in the chat that came up, and now we have another in Q&A. But the question in the chat is there an at-home way to test creep for protein and fats?
No.
No.
No, unless you've got a bomb calorimeter and you have ether that you're able to extract those fats. If you've got a mini laboratory at your facility, no, it will just be as easy for you to submit that feed sample for testing. If you're buying your rations from a feed company or a supplier, they should have those statistics on the label itself. If you're buying ingredients from a specific feed company, you can request to have your feedstuffs tested, and generally a lot of your feed companies will work with you, because if your feed samples are off in any bit, they're going to sell you more product to help correct or remedy any of those issues.
And in that case, the last Q&A question that we had was really a statement where someone had found an advertisement for the USB version of the sheep production handbook for $19.95. So if you're
Yes.
only interested in getting the USB, you don't have to go in at the $100 investment. But I still like real books. So
For how big that one is, I still like the real book as well.
Yeah.
we have another in the chat. If I'm getting a 15% protein and I need, say, 20%, I work with the feed company to change that. In the case of creep,
Yes, and that should be purchased from your feed supplier. Again, if you're buying a creep feed, it's more than likely a pellet, and it's being produced by that feed company themselves. So just simply work with them and see if they're able to get you the product that you need.
But if you're going to work with these feed companies, again, they do have minimum tonnage if you're going to have the product mixed to your criteria. So that could be a little restrictive for smaller flocks, but you just have to check with them and see.
yep, another question in the Q&A is similar. If I have 17% protein, how do I add more protein to that? I think that a lot of the solution here is shop around some more to find a feed that better suits your needs. So you're not paying already for a creep feed that's developed that doesn't suit your needs, creating more work for you. Look around
Yep.
to some other feed companies. Consider that custom blend if you can afford that, or go in on it with a neighbor if possible. And that's their job, right? Is to provide a feed that meets your needs. So ask for it.
Yeah. And somebody I saw mentioned in there, our regional feed producers here in the state of Ohio, they all have nutritionists on staff that can handle any small rumen question.
Mm-hmm. And again, these books that we've referenced to, the NRC and the Sheep Production Handbook, all have feed tables in them too, and it shows you what the feed specs or projected feed specs should be. So really, if you're doing this on your own, you've got your own ingredients at your leisure, you can take a look and see what are higher protein feeds and just dilute your ration with them.
Brady, aren't there some online ration balancing programs they could download?
There are. Yes. And you can take a look at it. I believe there is one for Montana State University. I think there is a sheep
I've used that. Yeah.
balancer program. Certainly. It looks
We
like
do
another.
have a comment in the chat about protein tubs, adding additional protein in the flock with a protein tub. And that is an option. It's not going to work so much for creep fed lambs, but for your ewes, that could be an option. I'm not a huge fan of the protein tub, but in a pinch, you can find them, you know what's in it, and they're relatively easy to feed. So an option.
Before Christine gets too negative on those, I do use them during gestation. and just as a supplemental source. And, yeah, they are rather pricey, but it is a nice self-feed option for gestating ewes.
Especially too if you're in an area where grain is hard to get. I know a lot of people here in Southeast Ohio use protein tubs on a regular basis, and they don't have a great source of getting grain from another area to help add that supplemental protein in the diet. So they like to go with the tub. So
But they are pricey. I think that's the biggest negative.
Yep.
Molasses doesn't have a whole lot of feed value.
Yes, two concerns is what is the source of protein? We can put a lot of urea into those tubs, which will hinder intake. So, and is it as readily available as some of our other protein sources? And two, the only other issue I have with the protein tubs is that we can't regulate intake. We may have females or individuals that are consuming more than others. So, for example, if you've got some females that are in need of the extra nutrition, they may not find themselves at that tub working on it. We have a comment here, Christine, in the chat that says that Kallenbach makes a calf starter with high protein feeds that are more reasonably priced than the sheep and goats. Just watch for the moninsin levels. The other thing that we need to consider is the key here is calf feed. When I see anything related to cattle, I immediately think of copper. So we need to really be cautious when we start experimenting with some of these feeds that are not recommended for our specific livestock species. Those feeds are specifically developed for cattle. There's been extensive research done on it for cattle. When we start feeding it to sheep and we have some ill effects with that, that's where we can have some issues go awry.
yeah, and you may have less issues with that with goats, but still, I mean, it's developed for cattle for a reason, and I am hesitant about crossing species with feeds like that, especially when you're spending the money to get the feed. When you look at the price per ton or the price per bag, does that price difference equal out the risk that you may be taking feeding that? For me, the answer is no, but I'm not feeding tons of feed a day, looking at how big of a difference that $2 to $3 may make.
Yep. And they also, and some of these feeds have ionophores in them too. So we need to really pay attention which type of ionophores are being in this feed. Can be detrimental to some of our species. Horses, they can't have any of it. So you got equids, if you've got guard donkeys, certainly some things that we need to consider prior to making those decisions.
We do have a question here. Let's take one more question for the evening, guys. We've got a question about watching body condition scores, temperament, and movement to see which ewes are getting enough throughout gestation. Do you just keep watching them and making your decision based on that? On what to provide, I assume?
So I believe this is a nutrition question, I imagine. Well,
Yeah, it sounds like it's relating to that protein question that she had
yeah.
before.
Yeah, I imagine it'll be coming in next webinar much more in detail. But yeah, keep an eye on that body condition score. And like Brady said, that last trimester, that's a lot of nutrient uptake by that fetus. So we want to be sure that we're putting enough there, but also not too much, because we don't want those lambs to be giant coming out. Right. I tried to do this myself when I was pregnant that last trimester. I limit fed myself so the baby wouldn't be giant. It didn't work. Apparently I was too hungry. So we do want to just keep a great close eye on those body condition scores.
If you are an inexperienced shepherd on this body condition score, make sure you're analyzing them in shorter fleece. That it can be a little tricky, especially in gestation if they have multiple births. Eventually they get to the point they still may look very full and look great if they got 3 or 4 inches of fleece. So you just be careful and make sure you analyze exactly what their body condition score is.
And it's really challenging to change body condition score during gestation, especially during that last trimester, because again, a lot of those nutrients and materials are going to that conceptus itself. So even if we're trying to feed to improve body condition score, it's not going to happen during, the last portion of that pregnancy. So really, rule of thumb on these females, sheep are projected to have about 3% intake body weight. So if that gives us a rough idea, an extremely rough idea of the amount of feed to be feeding them to keep them happy.
Okay. Thank you all so much for your time. For our speakers and our attendees, we're here at 9:20 p.m. and we've still got 44 attendees on the webinar with us tonight. We hope that you'll all come back and join us next month for our nutrition webinar and maybe bring some friends along with you that didn't join us for tonight. As we mentioned, we will make the recording available to you. When that's available, we'll send it out by email so that you can access it at your convenience. And again, watch for the announcement tomorrow from the Sheep Team webpage with Jackie's video featured and some other information as well. Again, if you've never visited the Sheep Team webpage, go to sheep.osu.edu. And if you are a goat producer, we hope we don't scare you away by saying Sheep Team, because much of the information is also applicable to goats. And we are happy to talk goats with you as well. We don't have a specific section for goats on the webpage, but if you search that as a keyword, you're likely to pull up quite a few articles. And in most cases, the information translates both ways.
We're all here for the love of small ruminants. The only thing that will differ really between the two species is going to be our copper levels, but we can manage and really practice a lot of our procedures in the same manner.
With that, I will go ahead and stop the recording and end the webinar for this evening. And we hope you all have a wonderful night, a great rest of the month.